So, if you are standing in a city right now, or even if you just picture a major downtown skyline, I want you to just look up.
Right, just physically look up at the tallest building.
Exactly. Because we have this built-in, almost instinctual assumption in modern society that whoever is highest up is winning, you know?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, we completely equate vertical height with absolute power.
Right. It's the penthouse suite, the peak of the mountain, the top of the corporate org chart, like the tallest. Oh, it looks incredible. It's glowing. But then you look down at where it actually meets the ocean floor and you see it has absolutely nothing anchoring it to the earth.
Oh, wow. So it's just floating.
Yeah, it is just hovering there,
Mm.
unattached, just waiting for a single, strong lateral current to basically snap it in half.
That is, I mean, that's a terrifying visual when you frame it like that,
Right.
because it exposes this fundamental flaw in how we perceive strength. We look at the sheer volume of space something takes up, and we mistake that volume for endurance.
Which brings us perfectly into the dark, viscous, and honestly highly conceptual universe we are exploring today.
Yes, the archive we're getting into today is just phenomenal.
It really is. We've gotten our hands on this extraordinary stack of cinematic script reports, visual mood boards, and master workflow documents for a conceptual sci-fi epic.
And the core mission of this deep dive today is to unpack this terminal collision between two gods.
But, and we need to be really clear about this for anyone listening, this isn't like a standard comic book movie,
No, definitely not. I mean, the creators explicitly describe this genre as a synthesis of geopolitical noir and whiskey-worn Southern Gothic.
which is such a wild combination of words. Whiskey-worn Southern Gothic meets geopolitical noir.
It is incredibly specific, because in this universe, divine sovereignty isn't treated as some abstract mythological magic. There are no lightning bolts and capes here.
Right, so what is sovereignty in this context?
Sovereignty is treated as physical infrastructure. It's treated like corporate market cap. So the gods are defined entirely by what they build.
And how much it actually costs them to build it, right?
Exactly. And most importantly, whether those structures can actually survive the brutal physics of their own universe.
And the entire narrative architecture of these documents is built around one brutal operating maxim. Like, I want to plant this phrase in your head as we navigate through this universe today.
And that phrase is endurance over volume.
Endurance over volume. It is a story designed from the ground up to test the idea that a foundation built on sacrifice will eternally outlast a monument built on pride.
It's a fascinating premise.
So, okay, let's unpack this. Because if we are going to watch these two irreconcilable sovereigns collide, we first need to understand the architectural and ideological extremes they represent.
Right, we have to meet the combatants, Amaterasu and Hecate.
So let's start by looking up at the sky.
Good place to start.
Uh,
So we begin with Amaterasu, the solar sovereign, and the workflow documents explicitly title her the architect of absolute volume.
Absolute volume. Okay, so she takes up space.
Exactly. If you were to map her onto a traditional mythological pantheon, she would basically be the Zeus equivalent.
But without the literal thunderbolts.
Right. Instead of throwing thunderbolts from Mount Olympus, she's framed as this detached, divine CEO. She's the ultimate embodiment of what the creators call the expansionist ego.
So she's just obsessed with constant growth.
Yes, everything about her visual design and her domain is engineered to project unchecked corporate hegemony. The script notes literally describe her reign as an IPO of the gods.
Wait, I want to make sure I am fully grasping how that translates to a character on screen. An IPO of the gods, like an initial public offering in finance.
Exactly that.
Because that implies a massive influx of capital, right? A huge valuation, a ton of hype. But fundamentally, it's about selling a promise of future growth. It's totally speculative.
Precisely. It is entirely speculative. It is a skybound vanity. And the creators mandate that this speculative arrogance is reflected directly in her architecture.
How so? Like, what does her world actually look like?
Well, she presides over the abyssal megacity, which the script also calls Mat, but she doesn't actually live down in the city itself.
Of course not. She's the CEO.
Right, she has to be above it. Her specific domain is the gilded spire. And the production design notes for the spire are just fascinating. They describe a vertical monolith made entirely of sheer glass, cantilevered solar plating, and high-pressure hulls.
Okay, I want to pause on that word for a second. Cantilevered. Because for anyone who isn't an architect, a cantilever is a beam or a structure that is only supported on one end.
Right, it juts out into nothing.
Exactly. Jets out horizontally into empty space. Like, think of a diving board or those ultra-modern cliffside houses with a balcony hanging over a canyon.
Yeah, the ones that look like they're defying gravity.
Right. It looks sleek, but visually it always creates this sense of subconscious stress for the viewer, right?
Yeah.
Because your brain inherently expects it to fall.
And that is exactly why the designers chose it. Cantilevered solar plating means she has these massive, incredibly heavy gold structures hanging in the void with no visible support beneath them.
So it literally defies physics.
It defies physics, which is the entire point. Amaterasu wants to project that she is beyond physics.
Wow. And I saw in the notes the visual palette mandated for her scenes is super strict about reinforcing this.
Oh, very strict. The DP, the director of photography, is instructed to use only clinical glare, polished obsidian, high gloss, white marble, gold, and this very cold, stark indigo.
You know, that palette instantly makes me think of the lobby of a hyper-funded tech conglomerate or like an ultra-luxury flagship store.
Yeah, very Apple Store meets ancient deity.
Right. It is intimidating, it's pristine, but it is deeply, deeply unwelcoming. It just strips away all the warmth.
And that coldness really highlights her fatal flaw
Hmm.
because she equates height with sovereignty.
She thinks being the tallest makes her the strongest.
Exactly. She genuinely believes that because she occupies the most volume in the sky, because her spire is the tallest structure in existence, she is the most powerful entity.
But going back to the ocean analogy, her architecture has no structural integrity at its base.
None at all. She has built an empire of glass in the sky, and she has entirely forgotten the dirt she sits on.
Which brings us crashing all the way down to the absolute bottom of this universe, Amaterasu's complete opposite.
Yes, Hecate, the Iron Matriarch.
So if Amaterasu is the pristine, untouchable CEO, who is Hecate?
Hecate is the heavily scarred survivor. If Amaterasu is Zeus, Hecate is an Odin equivalent figure. She rules a domain known as the Stormtoft Outpost, or Helheim, which is also called the Obsidian Root.
The sovereign of the Iron Root. That just sounds heavy.
It is. And unlike Amaterasu, Hecate doesn't represent endless expansion. She represents sacrificial wisdom and brutal industrial necessity.
The concept art descriptions for Hecate in these documents are incredible. They mandate a silhouette that is essentially a massive, low center of gravity mountain of reinforced iron and weathered hide.
Yeah, she isn't sleek at all. She is built like a bunker.
Right. Her authority isn't speculative, is it?
No, it isn't based on some divine IPO. Hecate's authority is a personal debt that she has paid in blood and oxidized iron over centuries.
And the visual palette really reflects that grounded reality, right? Like where Amaterasu is all clinical white and gold, Hecate's world is sea rust, frost, industrial gray, and these glowing amber runes.
Yeah, the amber runes, those are super important.
Right. They really stood out to me in the notes because they aren't just there to look cool or provide ambient lighting for the set.
No, they serve a very specific narrative function. The script explicitly states that these runes act as a visual record of her sacrifices.
Wait, so every time she loses something?
Every time she has endured a loss to keep her foundation intact, a new rune is etched into her armor.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, the physical cost of her endurance is literally worn on her exterior. She is permanently anchored to the bone of the earth.
So Hecate's operating philosophy is basically that true authority has absolutely nothing to do with reaching the highest peak.
Exactly. True authority is defined strictly by your capacity to withstand the crushing pressure of reality.
You know, mapping this onto how we operate today, it sounds exactly like the concept of technical debt in software engineering, or even just basic business models.
Oh, that's a great comparison. How do you mean?
Well, Amaterasu is the app built in a weekend with a beautiful, glossy user interface, right? It gets a billion-dollar valuation based entirely on how it looks and the promise of infinite scaling.
But the backend code is a complete disaster.
Exactly. It's a fragile, patched-together mess. It looks incredible when it's just sitting there on a screen. But the second a million concurrent users log on, like, the second real-world lateral pressure is applied, the entire thing crashes because there's no actual foundation.
Right.
Whereas Hecate is the mainframe banking computer from the 1980s.
That is a phenomenal way to frame it. She is the main thing.
Right. Like, she is clunky, she is heavy, she is covered in the digital equivalent of rust and scar tissue. But she processes billions of transactions a day flawlessly because the architecture is immovable.
Exactly. It's like a hyper-funded tech startup that's obsessed with infinite vertical scaling,
Yeah.
acquiring companies, throwing up massive, shiny headquarters, but they have zero actual business model and no foundational revenue.
Yes.
While Hecate is the 100-year-old legacy manufacturer in the Rust Belt that survives every single economic depression because they actually own the factories and the land. They own the dirt.
Man, that makes so much sense.
And what's fascinating here is how the workflow documents translate that exact dynamic, that corporate infrastructural disparity, into a visual medium.
Right, because this is a movie.
Exactly. It's
Yeah.
not just subtext hidden in the dialogue. The architecture itself is fighting this ideological war. The script forces these two philosophies to clash, not through a physical fistfight, but through the very mechanics of cinematography.
Okay, this is the part of the deep dive that absolutely blew my mind. Because the source material makes it clear that the physical confrontation between them isn't about magical powers. They are fighting using the actual medium of film.
They're weaponizing the aspect ratio.
Right. The script weaponizes the aspect ratio, but I'm actually struggling to fully grasp the mechanics of this. Doesn't a director usually just pick a screen size based on what camera they're using? Like, how can a scriptwriter dictate an aspect ratio to specifically weaponize it against a character?
Well, it is rare, but it is an absolute masterstroke of structural planning. The master workflow document strictly mandates a 16.9 anamorphic standard for the entire production.
Okay, 16.9 anamorphic.
Now, to understand why this is a weapon, we kind of have to explain what an anamorphic lens actually does. Because a lot of people assume widescreen just means a director put black bars at the top and bottom of the frame to make it look cinematic.
Right, that's exactly what I used to think. You just crop the top and bottom of the image so it looks like a movie.
But true anamorphic lenses don't just crop. They actually physically squeeze a much wider image onto the camera's sensor or the film stock.
They squeeze it.
Yeah, and then when the movie's projected in a theater, a corresponding lens stretches that image back out horizontally.
Oh, wow.
And this creates a highly specific optical effect. It distorts the edges of the frame, it creates those sweeping horizontal lens flares you always see in sci-fi, but most importantly, it creates a field of view that wraps around human peripheral vision horizontally.
So it's fundamentally prioritizing the horizontal plane.
Exactly. It fundamentally favors width over height. It is a horizontal rectangle that completely neglects vertical space.
So if you have an aspect ratio that is inherently hostile to verticality, you are basically setting a trap for a character whose entire identity is vertical.
Exactly. By maximizing the horizontal plane, the script visually frames Amaterasu's vertical gilded spire as a precarious, unstable intruder in the world. It literally doesn't belong in that shape of a frame.
The documents introduce a specific visual protocol for this, right? They call it the 80% negative space rule, and it is so punishing.
Oh, it's brutal. The rule dictates that whenever the camera shows Amaterasu's spire, it must be intentionally surrounded by 80% negative space. Specifically, that cold, stark indigo sky we mentioned earlier.
Let's visualize that for a second. If you are sitting in a massive movie theater looking at a huge wide screen and the director places a needle-thin vertical tower dead in the center, mostly what you, the audience, are looking at is empty space.
Just a sea of indigo.
Right. It makes the height look lonely, it strips away its power, and psychologically it makes the tower look highly unstable against the crushing pressure of the wide frame. Like, it looks like a single breeze could just tip it over.
And you contrast that hostility with the visual mandate for Hecate's domain. The protocol for the Obsidian route relies entirely on deep focus, wide shots.
So everything is in focus, stretching way into the background.
Yes. Her world is a horizontal mass of blackened metal stretching across a flat horizon. She completely fills the horizontal axis of the frame from the far left edge all the way to the far right edge.
Emphasizing unshakable stability.
It creates an inescapable scale. Hecate isn't an intruder in the 16.9 frame. The frame was built for her. She is part of the Earth's bone.
And when they finally share the screen, the script introduces what it calls the horizon line conflict.
Yes, this is brilliant.
Because they are never allowed to occupy the center together. They must be anchored at opposite horizontal poles.
Right, so Amaterasu is permanently anchored on the far left of the screen, straining upward against the top edge of the frame, like she's trying to escape the frame entirely.
And Hecate is anchored on the far right, a heavy mass hugging the bottom edge of the frame, totally grounded.
It visually creates this vast ideological void between them. It's a literal geopolitical stalemate mapped onto the rule of thirds.
If we connect this to the bigger picture of visual storytelling, The medium itself is taking a side.
It absolutely is. The 16.9 frame inherently validates Hecate's endurance and horizontal density, and it inherently rejects Amaterasu's vertical expansion. It is a hostile environment for an ego that only knows how to build upward.
It's like trying to watch a vertical smartphone video, like a TikTok, on a massive IMAX theater screen.
Oh, that's a perfect analogy.
It inherently feels wrong. The medium itself is rejecting the subject. You see those huge black bars on the side, the negative space, and you just feel like something is fundamentally missing. The format is exposing the flaw in how the subject was captured.
Exactly. And to add even more physical weight to this visual conflict, the documents introduce a lighting mandate called the viscous noir shadow script.
Viscous noir. This is where the cinematography gets truly oppressive.
Oh, totally. Because in standard cinema, darkness is usually just an absence of light.
Right.
A shadow is just a place where the key light isn't hitting.
Yeah, it's just dark.
But in this specific noir protocol, the shadows are explicitly described as viscous.
Viscous, like motor oil or thick syrup.
Exactly. The script treats shadows as having actual physical mass. They carry the physical weight of industrial waste, silt, leaking pipes, and human decay.
So the darkness is literally thick.
It's thick, and it resists movement. So later on, when Amaterasu's clinical weightless light tries to penetrate Hecate's domain, it doesn't just illuminate the darkness, it hits a physical wall of heavy shadow that fights back.
Okay, so we have the combatants, we understand their opposing infrastructures, and we have the visual rules of engagement detailing how the camera itself will favor the Earth over the sky. Now, we really need to see how this actually plays out.
You can look at the movements.
Right, because the script is structured into 4 distinct cinematic movements. But before we look at the opening shot of Movement I, we have to talk about the dialogue.
Ah, yes, the 10-word rule.
Because the workflow document enforces this massive, almost impossible restriction on the writer here. The 10-word rule.
The 10-word rule is perhaps the most audacious constraint in the entire archive. The mandate strictly states that no single line of dialogue from any character can exceed 10 words.
Wait, not a single line?
Not a single line.
I mean, I'm trying to think of how a screenwriter even functions under that constraint. In a massive conceptual sci-fi epic where you have to establish entirely new worlds, political systems, and the physics of these gods, doesn't a writer desperately need exposition? Like, don't they need characters to explain the world to the audience?
Usually, yes. Which is exactly why sci-fi is often plagued by characters giving these long, breathless expositional speeches. As you know, our solar arrays have been failing since the Great War.
Right, it feels super unnatural.
By enforcing a 10-word limit, the creators are forcing complete reliance on silence, architecture, and subtext. Think about it. These characters are ancient, massive manifestations of authority. They shouldn't be babbling.
That makes sense. They wouldn't need to explain themselves.
Exactly. The restriction forces every single word to carry the ancestral weight of centuries. It strips away all the conversational fluff and leaves only brutal ideological declarations. The world explains itself visually. The characters only speak to confirm their absolute worldviews.
So let's see that in action in Movement I, which is titled The Vanity of Volume, and it's set at the Solar Gate. How does a director visually communicate an ideology built entirely on endless vertical expansion before a character even opens their mouth?
Well, Movement I opens by exposing the isolation of that vanity. The visual action centers on the needle-thin spire sitting dead center in the widescreen frame, straining against the top edge.
With all that 80% negative space.
Exactly. There is a blinding gold light at the very apex, but the base of the spire is completely lost in a cold, clinical indigo vacuum. It just fades into nothingness.
And we see Amaterasu, right?
Yeah, Amaterasu is seen walking on one of those cantilevered gold ledges we talked about with absolutely no visible support beneath her boots. The void.
And the sound design mandated here is deeply psychological, isn't it? Like, the SFX triggers aren't grand orchestral music. The document lists low rhythmic hums of a pressurized vacuum, the crystalline chimes of shifting brittle glass and distant thunder. That auditory combination is highly specific.
It is pure psychoacoustics. Think about it. The sound of a pressurized vacuum implies a space that is fundamentally hostile to life.
You can't breathe there.
Right. And the crystalline chimes of brittle glass under stress imply imminent structural failure. It sounds incredibly fragile.
Like a wine glass right before the exact frequency hits and it just shatters.
Yes.
And into that fragile, pressurized silence, we get her first line of dialogue, 10 words maximum. She says, "Physics is merely a subsidiary of my will."
9 words.
Yeah.
And it perfectly encapsulates the expansionist ego. She views the fundamental laws of nature, physics, gravity, structural integrity as just another corporation she has acquired and subjugated.
Her next line is, "Sovereignty is the view from the apex." 8 words. She is completely, terrifyingly detached.
It is pure hubris. The sound design of the pressurized vacuum and the shifting glass is telling the audience what Amaterasu refuses to acknowledge.
Which is what?
That her entire existence is a precarious artifice constantly fighting the natural crushing pressure of the universe. She thinks she owns the sky, but the sky is actively trying to crush her.
And then, the script executes a hard slam cut to movement 2. The reality of the route, taking us down to the iron crossroads. The tonal whiplash is staggering.
It really is. Movement 2 immediately establishes the horizontal dominance we discussed. It opens with an extreme, deep-focus wide shot, a horizontal mass of blackened metal stretching endlessly on a flat horizon.
But then the camera moves.
Yeah, the camera pushes into an iron trench filled with chiaroscuro layers of gray.
Let's clarify chiaroscuro real quick for the audience. It's a technique from Renaissance painting, right?
Oh, yeah.
Using incredibly strong contrast between light and dark to give a sense of three-dimensional volume and weight.
Exactly. Rembrandt and Caravaggio used it all the time. In film, it means the lighting isn't flat. It carves out shapes. It makes the iron look heavy, textured, and real.
And filling those carved-out shadows are the viscous, thick, humid dark spaces we talked about earlier.
Exactly. And then Hecate appears in her brutalist armor, visibly etched with those glowing amber runes of sacrifice. And the action simply has her reach out to physically touch a frost-gray etched industrial gear. She is interacting directly with the machinery of her world.
And the sound design completely flips here. All the fragile glass and sterile vacuums are gone. The SFX triggers mandated for Hecate's domain are the rhythmic grinding of oxidized iron gears, the wet slap of heavy industrial cables, high-pressure steam hissing, and literal tectonic groans.
Think about how that feels in a theater equipped with heavy subwoofers.
Oh, it would rattle your teeth.
Amaterasu is surrounded by hollow, high-frequency sounds that lack mass. Hecate's world is dense, wet, and relentlessly heavy. The audio literally shakes your seat. It sounds like an engine that has been running without stopping for 1,000 years.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Hecate's dialogue perfectly mirrors this visceral weight. Because in response to Amaterasu's hubris, Hecate says, "The iron remembers what the sun forgets." 7 words.
Beautifully written.
And then, "Every rivet is a scar we earned." 7 words again.
This raises a really important question about how these characters view history. Amaterasu literally says later in the script, "The earth is a legacy I have outgrown."
Wow.
Yeah, she thinks that moving past the dirt, ignoring the messy reality of the foundation, is evolution. She believes detachment is a sign of superiority. Being untouched by the dirt is her definition of divinity.
So is the script fundamentally suggesting that absolute power always detaches you from reality, while true resilience requires you to stay in the dirt? Because it feels like a warning.
It is an absolute warning. The text is making a profound architectural and moral statement. The script argues that Amaterasu's detachment is actually a fatal vulnerability.
Because she has no base.
Right. If you are not touching the dirt, you have no leverage. You have no friction. Hecate, on the other hand, embraces the dirt, the rust, the humid decay. She recognizes that staying connected to the physical, heavy reality of the earth, even when it is incredibly painful, even when it literally scars your armor, is the only way to build a foundation that can actually survive a storm.
It's the difference between trying to withstand a hurricane in a hot air balloon versus a concrete bunker.
That's a great image.
The balloon might be higher up, it might offer a much better view from the apex, but the absolute second the atmospheric pressure changes, it is entirely at the mercy of the elements. It just gets swept away. The bunker doesn't move. It isn't pretty, but it survives.
Exactly. And that tension, the inherent fragile instability of the spire stacked against the immovable tectonic reality of the root, it builds relentlessly throughout the first 2 movements. The script establishes that these ideologies simply cannot coexist. One is trying to escape physics, the other is built out of physics.
Which brings us to the inevitable breaking point. They have to grind against each other. Which brings us to movement 3, the horizon collision. Or, as the workflow documents beautifully title it, violent chiaroscuro.
This is where the 16.9 widescreen protocol really flexes its cinematic muscles. Because again, we need to remember this isn't a traditional fight scene. No one is throwing a punch.
Right.
It is a conceptual, environmental battle described in the notes as a palette grinding.
A palette grinding. I mean, how does a director physically film colors fighting? Like, how does that work on screen?
By using the poles of the screen we talked about, Amaterasu is permanently anchored at the left pole of the frame, emitting her clinical gold and cyan light.
Huh.
Hecate is anchored at the right pole, anchored in sea rust and frost. The conflict happens in the negative space between them.
Ah, okay. The visual action is described as elongated, viscous indigo shadows physically attempting to pierce the rust foundation of Hecate's world. But the shadows fail.
They can't penetrate the density.
Right. Instead, the clinical gold and cyan of Amaterasu's world are systematically and violently consumed by the heavy, viscous shadows of sea rust from Hecate's domain. A horizontal shockwave literally shatters the indigo sky. The earth pushes outward, and the sky cracks.
It is a profound visual representation of structural pressure. The horizontal density of the earth is physically crushing the vertical vanity of the sky.
And the sound design during the sequence is absolute chaos.
Right.
But, like, highly controlled chaos.
Very controlled. Dueling atmospheric hums trying to overpower each other. The deafening sharp snap of a massive electrical arc.
And those earth-shaking booms.
Yes, booms that linger exclusively in the low end of the audio mix, just shaking the audience's bones. And underneath it all, the terrifying metallic scream of buckling Art Deco steel.
The dialogue during this terminal collision is incredible, too. It is the ultimate distillation of their philosophies. As the shockwave hits, Amaterasu screams, "My volume owns the sky."
And Hecate, without moving at all, simply replies, "The earth owns the floor."
The sky is limitless, yes, but it offers absolutely no structural support. It cannot hold weight. The floor is finite, it is dirty, but it is absolute.
And this physical reality leads directly into the finale of the film, Movement 4. The collapse of light.
The collapse. The gilded spire's lack of a foundational base is finally exposed under the stress of this horizontal shockwave. The structure buckles.
It can't handle a lateral pressure.
Exactly. Those beautiful cantilevered geometric gold rings we talked about, they shatter into millions of pieces, and the entire spire just folds into the vacuum. It completely disintegrates. It doesn't just tip over and fall to the ground like a normal building. It is consumed by its own lack of substance. It literally winks out of existence.
Which brings us to the resolution, which is governed by a principle the creators call the scarred winner. The spire is gone. The anamorphic frame transitions to a flat, infinite horizontal expanse of frost, gray, and oxidized ochre. Hecate stands alone in deep focus. She fills the frame.
But I really want to highlight something crucial here. She doesn't walk away clean, does she?
No, she doesn't.
Because the script specifically notes a change in her costume design. Her iron armor is now heavily scarred by new rust. She has paid a new price. She is illuminated by just a single amber spark in a world of oppressive gray.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, it is vital to understand why Amaterasu lost.
Yeah.
Because she didn't lose, because Hecate used a bigger laser beam or magically overpowered her.
Right.
Amaterasu lost because her verticality was fundamentally a fraud. She was a glass needle that forgot the dirt it sat on. The moment she faced genuine, lateral, horizontal pressure, her lack of foundational integrity destroyed her from the inside out.
I was trying to think of an analogy for this scarred winner concept earlier, because a lot of action movies end with the hero standing victorious, maybe with a cool scratch on their cheek, but essentially fine.
Yeah, they brush the dust off and they're good to go.
Right. But this script entirely rejects that. True survival is like a boxer winning a grueling, brutal 12-round fight. Yes, they get their hand raised. Yes, they get the championship belt. But they are going straight to the hospital the absolute second the press conference ends.
Oh, absolutely.
Their face is unrecognizable. Their ribs are cracked. They are pissing blood. Survival in the real world is a debt you pay with your own body, not a shiny prize you win. Hecate survived, but the catastrophic cost is etched right onto her armor in the form of a new glowing rune.
The sound design at the very end of Moving Forth is just haunting. We hear the immense roar of collapsing structures, followed by the hollow, sucking sound of a dying vacuum, which is Amaterasu's entire domain winking out of existence.
Oh, amen.
And then absolute silence. The only sound left in the theater is a hollow, tomb-like wind blowing across the flat horizon and a single high-pressure steam release from Hecate's gear. The machine is still running.
And we get the final dialogue exchange. Amaterasu's last 10 words, as her ego is disintegrating into nothing, are, "The vacuum. It consumes everything."
She still blames the environment. She blames the void. She refuses to take responsibility for her own structural failure.
Right. But Hecate, standing heavily in the ruins, bleeding rust, says, "Endurance is the machine that never stops." And then the final line of the entire script. The iron outlasts the sun.
It is a definitive, crushing victory for foundational stability over expansionist ego. The root holds what the height ultimately loses.
So we have this incredible visceral breakdown of a cinematic clash between architecture and ideology. We see exactly how a DP can weaponize a 16.9 lens. But, transitioning from the movie screen to our actual lives, what does this all mean for you listening right now?
Well, the creators of this project didn't just write a script. They included a narrative coda at the very end of the workflow documents that synthesizes the entire archive into a philosophy.
Because they wanted this to apply to the real world.
Exactly. The closing monologue in the Project Bible is incredibly poignant, and it makes it very clear this was always a commentary on human behavior. It reads, "You see it all the time. A woman builds a spire so high she forgets the dirt it sits on. She calls it sovereignty. I call it a long way to fall."
Wow.
And it finishes with, "Wisdom ain't found in the ascent. It's forged in the furnace of what you're willing to lose."
Let me repeat that last part because it is the absolute core of everything we've talked about today. Wisdom ain't found in the ascent, it's forged in the furnace of what you're willing to lose. We live in a world, in a modern society, that is completely pathologically obsessed with volume.
Oh, without a doubt.
Everything around us demands constant expansion, endless economic growth year over year, scaling your startup to a unicorn valuation, accumulating tens of thousands of social media followers, maximizing your personal market cap. It is all verticality. It is all about taking up more space in the sky. It's the IPO of the self.
Exactly. We are socially conditioned to be architects of absolute volume. We want the gilded spire because it looks clean, it looks wealthy, and it looks successful on the surface. But this script argues something entirely different.
It argues that true power isn't the ability to take up space. It is the ability to withstand pressure.
Yes. In an era of constant information overload, rapid technological shifts, and intense, crushing societal pressure, building a towering, brittle identity based on vanity is incredibly dangerous.
Yeah.
Because the lateral winds are going to blow eventually.
So what does this all mean practically? It means that to survive the terminal collisions of modern life, whether that is a sudden economic downturn, a massive personal crisis, or just the relentless, overwhelming noise of the digital age, you need an obsidian root. You simply cannot survive on a cantilevered balcony. You need a foundation of deep, heavily scarred, immovable wisdom.
You have to cultivate self-awareness. Growth is a massive liability if it outpaces your structural integrity. Hecate's power came from the fact that she owned the floor. She knew exactly who she was, she knew exactly what her flaws were, and she knew exactly what kind of pressure she was built to withstand. She wasn't trying to touch the stars. She was making absolutely sure she couldn't be moved from the earth.
It fundamentally changes my perspective on ambition versus resilience. We spend our entire lives trying to build penthouse suites. We focus all our energy on the glass and the gold plating. We completely ignore the basement because we don't want to deal with the leaking pipes and the rust of our own psychological infrastructure.
Yeah, nobody wants to look at the rust.
But the most valuable real estate isn't the top floor, it's the bedrock. That is exactly where the strength is.
It is the difference between a fragile ego and profound self-awareness. The ego expands infinitely outward until it pops under its own lack of density. Self-awareness digs downward until it is unshakable.
As we wrap up this deep dive into the archive, let's briefly recap the mechanics of this incredible journey. We started at the pristine, clinical, hubristic apex of Amaterasu's spire, a monument to unchecked expansion floating precariously in a 16.9 void.
And we tracked the inevitable, violent collapse of that vanity when it was forced to grind against the heavy, rusted, viscous reality of Hecate's iron root.
We saw how the creators weaponized the very dimensions of the cinematic frame, how an anamorphic lens naturally favored the wide, grounded, deep-focus footprint of the Earth, while actively isolating and rejecting the precarious, cantilevered needle of the sky.
And we witnessed the harsh reality of the scarred winner, the acknowledgement that true endurance always comes with a brutal cost, made visible in the amber runes of sacrifice.
You simply cannot topple what is already part of the Earth's bone. But, the creators of this universe didn't just want to tell a closed-loop story. They wanted to implicate the audience in what comes next.
They did. Included in the council briefing documents is a final, highly provocative, interactive concept, The universe of this script demands a choice for the next stage of its development, asking the Creative Council, and by extension, you to vote on the aesthetic and philosophical direction of the next adaptation.
Right, because following the catastrophic fallout of this terminal collision, the timeline permanently splits into two potential aesthetic paths.
Do you choose to explore Samurai Noir, which focuses intensely on bone-deep sacrifice, shadow-etched steel, rigid discipline, and the heavy personal burden of ancestral debt?
Or do you choose the alternative, Wasteland Noir, which leans heavily into the environmental aftermath, exploring the industrial waste, the humid decay, and the crushing physical pressure of existing in a post-expansionist, ruined world where only the rust survives?
What is brilliant is that neither path offers a clean golden spire. Both paths require a total acknowledgement of the dirt. Both demand a foundation built on sacrifice rather than pride. It is simply a question of how you choose to armor yourself against the inevitable pressure.
The archive never forgets. As you go out into the world today, look at the spires you are desperately trying to build and look down at the roots you might be ignoring. You have to ask yourself, which weight are you willing to carry?